If you're looking for a fun and relatively easy project for Christmas gifts this year, this video is for you. Serving boards are a great gift for Christmas, birthdays, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, really any occasion. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I made 4 serving boards for friends this Christmas. And I even made 1 extra board for a special purpose. This project's going to start in my local lumber store. This is Northwest Lumber in Indianapolis. I've had a great experience here if you're in the area. I picked up some 4/4 lumber, including 1 7-foot piece of walnut that was 6.5 inches wide, and 2 8-foot pieces of maple at 5 inches wide. This should be plenty of wood to make all the boards according to my plans. In total, it was about 3.5 board feet of walnut, costing about $50, and another 6 board feet of maple, costing $50 as well. So all in all, on these boards, I'm in about $100. The design for this board is going to be a 3-inch wide piece of walnut, surrounded by a 4.5-inch piece of maple on each side. That means these boards are going to start about 18 inches long and 12 inches wide. But after making some finishing cuts, these will end up about 17 by 11. From there, we'll also add some customization later. I took these boards home and started the milling process. The first step I like to do is to cut my boards to length. This just makes them a little more manageable through the next steps. So we need 5 walnut boards at 18 inches long. I strategically bought a board wider than 6 inches so I can get 2 cuts out of each 18-inch section. So here I'm cutting out 3 18-inch sections of the walnut. For the maple, we also want 18-inch long boards, but their final dimension is going to be 4.5 inches wide. So for my 5-inch wide board, I can only get 1 18-inch section per cut. That means I'll need 10 total sections. Once we've done that, we'll move to the table saw. The first step here is going to be to joint the boards as best we can. I don't personally own a jointer, so I'm going to use the level trick of the table saw. If you want to copy me, just run the board through with the level against the fence to keep it nice straight side. I try to take as little as possible from the edge to leave enough for the project. When you're doing this, keep track of which edge has been cleaned up. Once you've jointed that one edge, we're going to cut the boards to width. Starting with a walnut, I'll set the saw to 3 inches wide, put the cleaned up edge against the fence, and run each board through. Since I'm taking 2 boards from each section, I'm going to run the leftover board through a second time as well, again with the already cut edge against the fence. This will give me my 5 3-inch wide pieces that I'll need for the walnut. Moving on to the maple, set the saw to 4.5 inches and put the cleaned up edge against the fence. Run each of the 10 boards through to get the sections we need. The last step of the milling process I'm going to use is to get my planer out and get everything to the same thickness. This is going to help me a little bit in the glue up process. I'm just going to run each board through once for now to make sure they're all the same thickness. The temperature has dropped pretty significantly as we moved into December in Indiana. So for the next step, I'm going to move inside. This is for 2 main reasons. 1, the glue is going to set up nicer if done inside. And 2, and most importantly, I don't like being cold. I'll start by trying to put the boards into sets by arranging them as best I can. I'm looking at 3 things here. 1, I'm trying to match the coloring of the boards as best as possible. You can kind of see here that the maple color can vary quite a bit, so I'm going to put the lighter boards together and the darker ones together. 2, I'm going to try to match the grain of the woods. You can see that some of these pieces have quite a bit of grain showing while others are cleaner. And 3, I want to push the boards together and try to get the best fitting seam as I can. This worked out pretty well, but there are 2 pieces of walnut that I want to trim up just for a better seam. Once I'm satisfied, I mark the end grain of each piece with a number and letter indicating which set and position the board should be in. I highly recommend doing this or you will get things mixed up later. Now I'm ready to glue up everything together. So this is how I do my glue ups. You have to start with a nice flat surface to reference off of. If you're gluing up on a crooked surface, you're going to end up with a crooked piece. I'll set down 2 F-style clamps for the boards to rest on. I'm going to glue the sets in pairs, so I lay out 2 sets on the clamps in the order I had marked. I have 4 more clamps ready as well, and 2 pairs of these caul boards. These boards are just made from scraps that have a layer of packing tape on them to ensure no wood-to-wood contact. They'll help me clamp things downward to keep the boards in the same plane vertically. Tilt each board up on its side to get it ready for glue. I'll use Titebond 3 here for the water resistance since this will be getting wet. Run a bead of glue down the length, set the boards flat on the clamps, and press together. Make sure you're not gluing here between the 2 different sets or you're going to end up with one massive board. Once you've got everything lightly pressed together, start to gently tighten the F-clamps simultaneously to apply even pressure. Don't overdo this pressure or the boards will start popping up vertically. At this point, I like to use the other end of my glue scraper to remove the excess glue from the top. Once that is done, use the caul boards to clamp vertically. You can see here I just add 1 to the top, 1 to the bottom, and use these clamps to pull them all together. Let everything sit for about 45 minutes to dry. After waiting 45 minutes, remove the clamps and clean up the excess glue while it's not fully set. I keep around a designated chisel for this process. Just lightly scrape at the joints and get as much exposed glue as you can. I highly recommend doing this at 45 minutes. It'll make your life a lot easier not trying to sand away all that glue later. I'm now going to let these set up overnight. Hopefully you can skip this next step, but most glue-ups don't have perfect seams. If you want to clean them up, you can use this method. Just add a bit of glue at the seam that needs filled. Wipe away all of the excess with a wet cloth. You really only want glue down in the seam. Then take your sander and just sand over the gap. Make sure you don't have a vacuum attached to your sander for this. This is going to force the sanding dust into the glue and fill any visual gap at the seam. After filling seams and letting that glue dry, I'm going to let the planer take a bit more material off each side and get these nice and flat. This isn't completely necessary, you can always just sand by hand here. Before we go any further, let's square off the short edges at the miter saw. Just cut off as little as possible to ensure a straight edge. The long edges should already be straight from the jointing process, so you don't have to worry about them. Now while I was working through the other steps, I 3D printed this radius guide that has a few different curvatures. I thought this 30mm radius looked best for these corners, so I just traced it on with a pencil and cut it out as closely as possible with a jigsaw. Once you've done that, just use your sander to clean it up to the line and smooth the cutout. So now we've got the basic shape of the board, but the top and bottom edges are kind of harsh. So I'm going to put a roundover edge with my router just to make these nicer to hold. I'm going to do this on my router table, but you should be able to do this freehand as well since the bit has a guide on it. I'm doing a 1/4 inch roundover here, but do whatever makes sense for your board. Once that's all done, I sanded each board with 300 grit sandpaper just to get everything nice and smooth. The sanding includes the roundover edges and the faces of the boards. Once I was satisfied with all of that, I moved on to personalizing each board with my laser etcher. I consulted with my wife, and we thought it would look best with each couple's name in the bottom right corner. I always do some testing with the scrap wood just to make sure the settings are right, and then I etched each one. The final step for these boards was to add the finish. I'm going with this food-safe butcher block conditioner called Howard's. There's a ton of discussion on finishes for boards like this. To me, this seemed like the best food-safe option that's going to last a while. I added a healthy amount on each of the surfaces and let it set overnight. After letting it set for about 8 hours, I wiped away the excess with a cloth. After a few more hours, the boards felt pretty dry to the touch. I was happy with the finished product and ready to give these away. So here's the finished product, 5 custom boards for each of my small group friends. So to make one of these boards, it's probably going to take you around 3 to 4 hours. And that work will be spread over a couple days just to allow the glue to dry. So really, even with minimal planning, you should be able to crank these out pretty quickly, even on short notice. Remember, these are face grained, so they're not the best for cutting boards, but they can be used if you really want to. But they are a great piece to serve charcuterie on, or just small snacks in general. Be sure to subscribe if you want to learn how board number 5 is going to kickstart my business going into 2025, and how you can do the same. If you enjoyed this video, you might like this one as well. Catch you in the next one.